Welcome back to a Celtic State of Mind. I'm Paul John Dykes, and today I'm delighted, honoured, and privileged to be joined by the one and only John Paul Mason. John Paul, welcome to the
Steady
show.
on. Steady on.
No, it's true. Every Thursday I look forward to this, and this is the thing, JP. When we go back to your introduction to coming on and talking Celtic, it still feels like that for me every Thursday. You're catching up with your mate on your favourite subject, the subject that if you were to go into Mastermind, you think you might do all right on, and that's Celtic. Well, you could do music, obscurities, you could do film, but Celtic would be my Mastermind subject. I'm not sure what era. It would need to be kind of probably post 50s.
I think you do all right at it as well, to be fair. I think you've absorbed pretty much all of that background that you've got there from the conversations I've had with you over the years anyway. And I say over the years, it's now 5 years.
Incredible. JP,
That's
it's
wild.
incredible. I'll tell you something, right? I wish I had that same retention of information on subjects like science, geography, and all that kind of stuff. And I could have been a total class A student. But you know what? My specialist subject is Celtic. And we're going to talk about Celtic for the next hour. And there is loads to talk about. I was thinking this morning, JP, I don't want to be negative. I really don't want to be negative, but there is something at the moment that seems to just be a little bit under the kind of par that we would expect at the moment. And I use this term all the time, laser focus, because I think that sometimes, and last season was a great example of this, Brendan Rodgers can regroup if something isn't quite right. He did it last season without, buying in lots and lots of players, and we regrouped for that run-in, and we ended up winning a double when it looked really unlikely. We're nowhere near that. But I do think we need a bit of a kind of check on the focus. That a few of the away games were shipping goals now. We weren't really doing that. We conceded 3 against Rangers on two occasions, and we conceded 3 against Dundee the other night. Is it a concern for you? Because as I say, I'm not going to be negative about the Celtic side. They've achieved so much, but I do think there's a few tweaks required at the minute.
Well, first of all, I watched the Dundee game last week against Rangers, and I was really impressed with Adewumi, the guy that scored against them and against us. And I have to say, if I was flush with money, I would have probably put a lot on a draw the other night for us. I just had a feeling we were going to drop points in one of those 2 games against Ross County and Dundee because, as my friend said to me the other night, we don't have a divine right to win every single game. These teams have also got their challenges, and they played well against Rangers. I don't think that can be denied. And I know that they were missing a few players as well, as were we. But obviously, it's going to impact a squad of their size a lot more than it is us. But I just think as well the sheer volume of games that we've played of late. I mean, how many games have we played in January now? 5, 6?
It'll be I think it's a total of 9 in the month of January, which is astonishing. Yeah.
Well, I mean, I think that's absolutely ridiculous. And as the manager said the other night, that they're not robots. As much as people maybe will immediately go, "Oh, man, they're highly paid players. They should be able to do this and everything else." But it's kind of relentless, and it's mentally tiring for fans. So, I mean, we're way down the list in terms of being mentally tired compared to what the players have to do, because the concentration levels and just the energy levels as well. They've not got the same recovery time as they normally do. And the sheer glut of games that there's been recently, I knew that there was going to be a points dropped at some point. Obviously, it was a bit nervy going into those last minutes of injury time, and we're fortunate to get the penalty. It was a penalty. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But we got away with one. I didn't realise that it had been that long since Dundee had recorded a victory over us. 37 years. It's absolutely wild.
It is wild, isn't it? It really is.
They were staring down that as a huge achievement. So, fortunately for us, we stopped that happening. But I had a feeling there was drop points coming. Maybe not a 3 each. I mean, shipping 3 goals. The own goal from Carter Vickers he doesn't go to ground, that doesn't go in. You see him raging with himself straight away. The first goal, I don't know if anybody's been criticising the defence for that. I think that was a really, really good counter attack and finish, as he proved he could do against Rangers as well. I think is he from Burnley on loan, and they've signed him. They signed him from an Italian club or something like that, and then they immediately put him out on loan.
I'm just checking them out actually, because Dundee have got a habit of doing this. You remember Owen Beck? They pulled Owen Beck out of the youth academy at Liverpool. He was playing left back. He was really impressing. And there's different levels, JP, of recruitment and scouting. And I think when you've got somebody like Tony Docherty, he's obviously scouring. He's scouring as many teams as he possibly can for these young players. He's got. Adewumi, like you say, he really did impress. Only 19 years of age. And, his parent club is Burnley and they've loaned him out to Dundee. But you're looking at a player like that. If he's at Celtic, if he's coming through the ranks right now, he's not getting a game.
No.
And that's the balance, right? And it's massive. It really is. It's like a multifaceted conversation constantly that we have. We're in January. We want signings. We're demanding signings. We want them now. We know the areas of the park that. But on the flip side, during the season, we talk about youth development, introducing young players. All right, what Brendan was to say, right, okay, I know we're a bit short on the wings here. I've got to bring in a winger from the B team. We would all be up in arms. So there's a bit of a balance there, and it's a very hard one to strike. I think Docherty's done amazingly at Dundee. They're just outside the top six, and that's virtue of Hibs really kicking on in the last month or so. Otherwise, they'd have been in the top six. For me, Docherty's a future Hibs manager. I've said that a few times on here. I think he's very, balanced. He's one of the guys that's very grounded, I think, JP. He doesn't come across as having this massive ego, very respectful to the opposition. And when we're going up there, I never ever think it's going to be easy. But I do think the other night, in many ways, we were the architects of that. And it's not taking anything away from Dundee. We'll get to trust in what he should be doing better, etc. But I'm going to bring up the first player I want to talk about, right? And I make absolutely no bones about it. I'm a big fan of Arnie Engels. I want to put that out there first. There's my personal disclosure. I'm a big fan. I've been really impressed with him. I can't understand why you would pick away at his performances to try and have an argument, JP, to say that he's not contributed enough to the Celtic side this season. And ridiculise Arnie is, by the way, very respectful, and that's fine. Are having a debate, and it's been kind of 3 or 4 days long here. So Ridiculizer comes in, PJ, to answer your question. Engels has materially influenced the grand total of 1 point all season. Dundee 3-3, whilst padding his record with penalties. Come on now. That's not true, right? Arnie Engels, I keep banging on about his amount, the amount of his assists, etc., and the fact that he scored an impressive amount of goals. Yet there are people lining up to say, but most of them are penalties. JP, see it at 3-2 down, looking down the barrel of that gun that you spoke about, that 37-year record, they never having been defeated by Dundee.
I'm sure that wasn't going through his mind at that point. I doubt he was aware of that, but I get your point.
And he doesn't, pressure doesn't affect him. But the penalty was not pointless. Because if he misses it and we get beat 3-2, we're sitting here and we're in peril. And, it's a completely different vibe and atmosphere to what we've done. Then we start looking at, but look what happened at Ibrox. And we start looking at, look what happened at Tannadice. He stepped up and he scored a penalty. It's such an important part of a footballer and their performance is being able to do that. And I don't think you can take that away. Yeah, it's not from open play. And I'm pretty sure Brendan Rodgers has said to Arnie Engels, you need to improve your return from open play. But if we're talking about materially influencing games, let's have a look at Arnie Engels this season, right? So Slovan Bratislava, Champions League, first ever champions, and 20 years of age at this point, first ever Champions League game, he scores a goal. He also creates a goal. Off to a fly in the Champions League. We might forget this in the fullness of time, but he also set up Dyson Maeda in Dortmund. So there's his second assist. RB Leipzig, one of the best performances in living memory, JP. Some might say generational performance. We beat them 3-1 and he gets an assist. So just on the Champions League, has he materially influenced where we are going into the young boys game? Of course he has.
I would say so, yeah.
100%. You then look at the League Cup. Right, now, he was obviously a substitute in the final, going through a bit of a patchy run of form. But in the League Cup, right, Falkirk, toughest game of the season at that point, according to Brendan Rodgers, right? They really came out as we eventually win 5-2. He gets an assist. Aberdeen, one of the best performances of the season at Hampden, 6-0, 2 assists. Rangers, the final, right? He puts us in a great position by assisting Kuhn that obviously resulted in us going 3-2 up. And that was a game that looked as though it was getting away from us. Has he materially influenced the League Cup win? Of course he has. We could do the same with the league. Yeah, he's scoring goals when we're winning 2-0, etc. And he's scoring them from the penalty spot, JP. But I think it's unfair to say that he's not materially influencing positive outcomes for Celtic this season.
I mean, it would be the same people that would say that Greg Taylor hasn't influenced any of our league titles in the last 4 years. I think the price tag is, if we'd signed him for 4 or 5 million, would there be as much scrutiny on him? No. I don't think so, no. And it's just unfair that he didn't have any say in that price. It's not as if he asked his club Augsburg to sell him for 11 million to Celtic. You know, that deal was done and he was as far away from it as possible. Yes, obviously there would have been wages involved in there, but I genuinely feel for the guy, because you can see already that he's got that kind of that fire in him. You know, like if he doesn't do something right, he's got that kind of. Remember Larson used to smack his knee. You remember that? He used to with his open hand. That was his thing. He would smack his not his knee, his thigh. He would smack his thigh with absolute frustration, and I always remember that. I don't know why that's come to mind, but I can just visualise Larson doing that whenever he missed, which was rare, but it did happen. And Engels has that same kind of. He doesn't just sort of put his head down and run off. He's like, right, I know I didn't do well enough there. I need to do better. And that's the attitude I think he's taken into every single game at this moment in time, is that if I've made a mistake, misplaced passes, got the amount of misplaced passes we've made of late, and it's been all over the team, not just him. Hattati the other night.
Frustrating.
God. Yeah. I mean, Greg Taylor's guilty of it as well. I'm not the one-man Greg Taylor fan club or anything like that. There's misplaced passes have happened throughout that team recently that are inexplicable, where we're trying to play passes that are clearly not on, sometimes across the middle of the park, which leads to teams breaking on us. But Engels has shown a lot for me, enough for me in these first 6 months of his Celtic career to suggest that the next 6 months will be a better 6 months, and the 6 months after that will be even better, I'd say. And you, if we're fortunate enough to be in the position that we're going into the Champions League next season after however many qualifiers we need to play, I'm not entirely sure at this moment in time if it's 1 round or 2 rounds or what. Is it just one? Is it the playoffs and then we're in, or do we have that banana skin of a round before the playoffs?
I don't think it's set in stone at this stage, JP. I think it does depend,
right, okay,
on your performance.
But after what will be 8, hopefully 10, hopefully more Champions League games this season for Arne Engels, his first time in the competition, I think going into the campaign next season, if we're fortunate enough to get there, then we'll have a guy who's not been there and done it, because he's only played 8, 10, whatever games, but he's experienced that pressure. He's experienced that the absolute despair of a defeat in Dortmund. I didn't mean that onomatopoeia there. That was defeat in the despair of the defeat in Dortmund. But he'll have gone through that, you know, and you need to go through that sometimes. You need to go through a defeat at Ibrox to come out the other side. I mean, that game still obviously stands out this season as being like this insane anomaly, you know. And even the Dortmund game does kind of fit into that bracket as well, because I mean, Dortmund aren't doing that great now, are they? I think they were getting beat at home the other day or away, maybe against a kind of lower lower division side. I can't remember. Somebody pointed out to me anyway, just saying, Dortmund aren't doing well, considering where they were a few months ago. But you need to go through the sort of the bad times to make the good times better. I don't doubt that. I don't doubt that these last few league wins that we've had since 55, as we'll call it, as they call it, although that might diminish a little bit after the end of this season, all being well, because we'll both have 55. But you need to suffer kind of despair to appreciate the good times. That's why I enjoy every single time we win, whether it's a League Cup, whether it's a Scottish Cup, whether it's anything. It's all to be savoured because, obviously we're of that vintage that we remember when things weren't great. And I actually went back and looked at the Rangers results in the early 90s before we won the league. Just like the pattern of it. So, I mean, in season 1991, I mean, I'd not looked at the sides. That'd be an interesting deeper dive. But I mean, we beat Rangers back to back, 2-0 and 3-0, Scottish Cup and League in that time. I mean, who was manager at that time? Was it Liam Brady?
It was Billy McNeil, and I'll tell you that
was it?
Just from memory, right? The first game was the St. Patrick's Day Massacre, where we beat them in the Cup. Then we beat them in the league, and in the league game, from memory, I'm going to say Tommy Coyne, Joe Miller, and Anton Rogan scored. In the 2-0 game, it was Dufjac and Jerry Craney, and there was loads of sending offs in both games. Nisbet gets sent off in the 3-0 game. In the 2-0 game, Peter Grant got sent off. And I think there was Terry Hurlock, Mark Haitley, maybe even a third Rangers player. Chip in the comment section. This is all from memory. And that showed, and I don't know if this is where you're going with this, JP, that even when we were at our worst, because because in one of in Billy
nowhere near cup finals, nowhere near challenging for the league, anything like that.
We finished 5th one of these seasons under Big Billy, and we still managed to beat a Rangers side where lots of money had been spent. I mean, that Rangers side, you're looking at a Rangers side that included the likes of La Petite Merde at that point. They had done the deed with Judas at that point, right? They had spent big money. You're looking at guys they had brought in, the likes of the England international right back Gary Stevens. Trevor Stephen was to follow. These were all big buys. Mark Haitley was a big signing. I'd need to check. I think it was Monaco they signed him from. And it was like, you look at his career trajectory, then he signs for Rangers. So they were chucking money at that point at their team. Celtic could still pull a victory, regardless of how poor we were. And if you go into the following season.
We went at Ibrox 2-0, 91-92. I mean, where were we in 91-92? We were nowhere. Again, nowhere near cup finals, nowhere near challenging for the league. So, as much as it was a painful defeat, a timely reminder to, I mean, sorry to sound all Celtic da here, but the timely reminder to younger fans who've known nothing but success that these defeats do happen.
Yeah.
When, that potentially could define their season, that one victory. And I said at the time, I hope they're still talking about 55 in 4 years' time. Here we are, 4 years down the line, they're still going on about 55. So, if they're still talking about a 3-0 victory against us when they pulled their pants down, fine. That's
all they've got. If that's what, and you're spot on, because that 2-0 game at Ibrox that you then mentioned, I'm going to say Jerry Craney scored in that game as well. By the way, Jerry, I want if Jerry or anybody that's watching knows Jerry, I want him on This Is Acsom on Friday night. I think it would be a fascinating interview, because I've said this before, right? Jerry Craney, at the age of 23, left Celtic, and at that point he had scored in games like the ones we're talking about. He scored a few goals against Rangers. He scored against Cologne in that incredible comeback, the 3-0 game. Borussia Dortmund scores against them. Sporting Lisbon scores against them. That was Bobby Robson's Sporting Lisbon, whose centre forward was George Cadet. Our midfield was Pat McGinley up against Luis Figo that night, right? But Jerry Craney somehow managed to score goals, right?
That's an absurd statement, isn't it? An absurd thought. I think
that's where we were.
I think Jerry Craney as a wee guy was my sort of second Celtic striking hero, like after McAvenny. It was McAvenny and then Jerry Craney became that guy. Just because I always had a long sleeve strip on and kind of looked like a kind of indie guy. You know, like I bet he was into like Happy Mondays, Stone Roses and all that.
Well, he eventually goes
like
Man City.
Sorry?
He eventually joins Man City.
Yeah.
After a prolific period at Portsmouth, which took none of us by surprise, Celtic fans, because we knew he could score goals. I look at the career of Jerry Cray. I think he was one of the playing victims of that period, because one of the worst playing victims, because people going about McStay and how he was carrying the team. I'm not comparing the two guys, by the way, and how he was carrying the team, and he could have had a much better Celtic career or a career elsewhere. I also look at Jerry Craney, and I think at 23, Celtic need the money. So we sell him for £500,000 to Portsmouth. In the January of 94, 2 months later, Fergus takes over. And you think to yourself, wow, how much different could it have been for that player? Proper sliding doors moment, right? 1998, Jerry Craney is 27 years of age, JP. Celtic are winning the league with Larson up front. Scotland are going to the World Cup. Jerry Craney's nowhere to be seen. He's played for St Mirren in the second tier of Scottish football. I'd love to speak to him. But those games were the games that I lived by. And it was, you're right, it was like the only antidote to everything else that was going on was that one win or a couple of wins against Rangers, because we did nothing else around about that period. And that's where they are now, JP.
100%. They are, and they know it as well. They do know it, because that game was quickly forgotten about within 3 days when they dropped points at Easter Road. But I think going back to us in present circumstances, I think the lack of winter break is massively impacted how things are. I think you could tell from the manager's comments that he would have probably, been would have been happy if we'd have had that opportunity to go somewhere. Because I just think about it from their point of view, just to get out of a freezing cold Scotland in January. And I know obviously it's a different lifestyle and everything else, and they're on a different financial planet to us. And some people would be like, oh, well, that never happened in the 60s and the 70s. There wasn't these mid-January or early January trips away. But I just think if there's the opportunity to do it, then it's obviously only going to benefit Celtic by this happening. I don't care if they're going over there and maybe letting their hair down a little bit. Maybe not pints at the pool as soon as they arrive.
Can you remember the Photoshop of Shane Duffy braiding Diego Laxalt's hair in Dubai by the poolside?
Yeah, I mean, I do. I want to insert the disclaimer, not during a global pandemic. That was the biggest misstep ever, really. But outside of that season, going away at this point in time also to bond as well, having a time to sort of anybody that's new in the door, like you see them going to the dart. I mean, the only thing they were able to do was go to the darts at Alexandra Palace, and that was obviously a team bonding night. Arnie Engels down there with Carter Vickers and Stephen Welsh, Taylor, Liam Scales, I think, as well. So that was their Dubai, was the darts at Alexandra Palace, which is hardly the most relaxing of affairs. I mean, it's obviously good for camaraderie and everything else, but I mean, Brendan Rodgers made the point in his press conference as well, how he watched a German Bundesliga game and he saw the energy in the game, they hadn't played since the 20th of December, and exactly. They come back and there's that renewed appetite, probably a renewed appetite from the fans as well, because I'll be honest, it's been a bit of all these home games together. It's just like, right, here we go again. And you know how much I love Celtic and love going to the football, but it's been relentless for a supporter, never mind the player.
See, the big thing with that, JP, now Jim Orr was in the press conference last week. He brought that up and he got a really good response for Brendan Rodgers, because you're right, it's twofold, right? So it's affecting the player and it's affecting the fan, particularly in the aftermath of Christmas, where it's a 5-week month. We're all in the same boat with that one, right? Financially, it's difficult for people. You might have your season ticket, but you've still got to get there. And there's still costs associated with that. So Brendan Rodgers absolutely accepted that. But you make a great point about players going away. yeah, we can go on about their lifestyles, the financial element of footballers' lives these days, but let's not forget that they are performing under levels of pressure, that different types of pressure, right, that most people won't ever have to experience. Now, I caveat that slightly by talking, and I'm going to have to mention him, right? The mustachioed one, Graham Souness, was once asked when he was at Liverpool about pressure, right? And his response was brilliant, right? He obviously went on to absolutely airbrush himself out of being a good guy, but his response was brilliant, and it was, pressure is being a father with 3 or 4 kids in a high rise and knowing that you've got to go out to work and work overtime to feed them. He said that's pressure. And I actually think now you've got 2 different types of pressure. You've got the daily rigors of working class life that we all have to put up with. And then you've got that pressure, JP, where you've got a professional sports person, athlete, footballer, playing for a club like Celtic, where a nothing each at Tannadice isn't good enough. A 3 each at Dens isn't good enough. The pressure, the stress levels are incomparable. They're huge. They're massive. You're talking about playing a game, then it's recovery, and you've got to recover from that game. And then you've got to get yourself right up here, and you've got analysis and data, as well as continuing to ensure that your health and your fitness is up to scratch. That refresh, I think, is absolutely key for a football team these days. And I think going away, having the refresh, resetting and coming back, couple of new faces in the door. January should be about that, and it's not. It's turned into a proper slog now in Scotland.
It's worse than some of the worst Decembers that we've had.
Yeah,
in terms of the level of games. So,
how does it benefit the Champions League endeavours? I mean, that's another thing that as a organisation, Scottish football needs to look at. Do we want Celtic to qualify?
People are starting to worry about that next week. There's been a bit of discourse about, how are we going to cope with this young boys Bern game, because we're not taking care of Dundee on a Tuesday night at Dens Park. So how are we going to take care of a Champions League team on a Tuesday? Now, obviously, you know that's a completely different challenge, and you know that although that's always the one game at a time mantra, you know that game has been well signposted in everybody's minds in terms of what it means to the club. You know, we haven't been in this sort of dizzy territory for a long time. I mean, over 10 years, 12 years since the last time we qualified.
We're looking at the game, remember, against Juventus, where they deployed all the dark arts at corner kicks mainly. Well beaten by that. I think it was 5-0 over the 2 legs. Well beaten. But that was the same campaign in which we beat Barcelona, the 2012 game. And that was the last time we qualified under Neil Lennon. I'll go back to Arnie Engels, because Charlie Mulgrew had 3 assists in that campaign. Engels is currently sitting on 3 in the Champions League, which is the most in 11 years for any Champions League campaign for a Celtic player. But that's brilliant, and it's his first campaign. Another thing I would point out is Callum McGregor, who is coming up in the comments section, and we'll discuss him. Only 2 times in his Celtic career has he scored more goals than 7 in a campaign, in a league season. And Engels is sitting on 7 now, albeit, yes, some of them have been penalties. So I think it's easy. You can take figures and then skew them to your own kind of perspective and your own opinion. But I think across the board, I'm going to agree with you here about the transfer fee. I seen a tweet yesterday, and it was a picture of Engels, once he's signed and he's got the jersey there, £11 million down the drain. And I thought, right, is this really a Celtic fan? And I'm going through their previous comments, etc., and that they're genuinely a Celtic supporter, and that's their opinion on this player. I'm thinking to myself, come on, that's not how this works. Absolutely is not. And we'll get on to Ida as well, because he's fallen into that category, JP. My biggest concern around that is the big money's been spent on players, and I think Brendan Rodgers needs to show the board that when we're spending big money, they make that material impact that we've been talking about. And we all know that the reason Rodgers was watching the Leipzig Werder Bremen game was because he was keeping an eye on Ollie Burke. We all appreciate and accept that, right? By the way, I also appreciate the fact that the lineage of that backdrop isn't quite right. That it's not quite lined up properly. I'll give that ready and properly sorted for Thursday of next week. Loafy, here we go. Let's have a positive chat and vibes today. No gloom and doom. John style chats. John Hughes, that is. Focus on the good. Focus on the positive for the week ahead. Kelly and young boys, let's go. I am compartmentalising those 2 games into a wee box and just focusing on them at the moment, JP. That's all my focus, because it's a cliche to say take one game at a time. I think at this level where you've got a Scottish Cup must-win game followed by a Champions League must-win game, you've got to look at the 2 of them, because you've got to pick your team based on who you're playing on Wednesday during the week as well. There's absolutely no doubt about it. That comes into Brendan Rodgers' thinking. What are you doing in that respect? Are you looking for continuity? Are you starting the team against Kilmarnock that you think will start against Young Boys? 2 completely different games and style of opponent. But do you think that's what we're doing?
No, I think he probably starts with a team and then looks to finish with the team that is playing Young Boys.
Mm-hmm.
So that would be the ideal scenario. Obviously, Maeda should be back for the weekend, I would imagine, but he might keep him on the bench to bring on. There's no pressing need to throw him right back into the start against Kilmarnock unless his medical staff tell him that that's a good thing. The striking situation is still a curious one. Ida, I like how he pulled the journalist up the other night for suggesting that there was some issue with Ida because he went down the tunnel, and he was like, "Oh, he came back though, didn't he?" And he was like, "Oh, you missed that." I love that from Rodgers.
Totally, mate. Totally.
Because he's just obviously he's so streetwise. He knows exactly what's been attempted to kick off there. The Ida thing, that the chance he misses the other night is a bad one. There's no 2 ways about it. He has chances on Saturday as well, but he was involved. It was only a tiny. It was a innocuous back heel in the lead up to that Kyogo goal at the weekend, which Alistair Johnson whipped in for Kyogo, and it was a brilliant Celtic goal. One of the best this season, I would say, in terms of just the team play and the build up to it. And Ida's involvement in that as a back heel, but it takes it takes Ross County players out of the equation to allow the counter to happen. So I'm not saying, oh well, okay, Ida's good just because he's done that, but I've seen enough from Adam Ida to know that he will come good. And I said last week he just needs a goal. We're a week down the line and he's not got a goal in either of those 2 games that we've played. But is he the sole reason that we haven't won those games, or we didn't win on Tuesday night? I don't think so. Is he the sole reason that we won 4-1 on Saturday? No. But I just think people are so quick to write people off. I mean, as the managers pointed out, folk wanted Kuhn out the door last year, a couple of months after the transfer window closed, and Kuhn's coming on and apparently playing horrendously. There was one game in particular that I missed, but I think it was against Hibs, and he apparently was really, really bad. And then look at him now. He comes on the other night, and you see immediately the impact that he can have on that wing against Dundee. Okay, it wasn't enough to get us the 3 points, but he wins the penalty, doesn't it? It was a shot that led to the penalty, and he just was so positive straight away. So we know what we've got when we've got a full strength team. We know that we've got a good side, but I would probably be looking to start still a strong side against Kilmarnock, but then to have those guys to come off the bench for maybe the last 25 minutes, half an hour, depending on where we are in the game.
Yeah, it makes sense. It really does. And he does popped up in the comment section. We're going to have a chat about him because there's been a drop-off in form. There's absolutely no doubt about it, JP. You just need to look at what he was doing last season compared to now, even just the goals or lack of that he's scoring at the moment. And I said a few weeks ago, he's going to have big moments this season. I still believe that. How do you manage him? So he's going through a tricky spell. You've got reporters who are trying to create a narrative, right? And they're asking you about it as the manager after games. You've got some fans getting on his back. I don't think he's getting flack as such, but I've heard a lot of people saying we need to get him out of the team, etc. I do still think that a striker, and I've said this all season, we had to buy a striker in the summer, and we didn't. We've ran with 2 strikers all season. And this is the bit. So you come to the point where if one of those 2 gets injured at the moment, the other one has to play, even though they're not scoring goals prolifically. And I know that Brendan Rodgers has said his game's not really about your centre forward scoring 30 or 40 goals every season. But I said yesterday, if strikers are not scoring, it affects their confidence.
Yeah.
So Adam Idah can't go 12 games, right? Play pretty well in all those 12 games and not score. He just can't. A striker can't do that, because what will happen is criticism will come his way anyway. So what do you do with him? Do you keep him in the team? Do you look at the Kilmarnock game last season, albeit at a different venue, and say probably his best overall performance for Celtic? Keep him in the team. Let him play through it. He'll get his goal. And once he does, you hope that he gets back to that kind of confidence that he had previously.
Yeah, I mean, I would start him on Saturday, yeah, because I would then start Kyogo on Wednesday, and that's no slight on him, but I absolutely would start Kyogo on Wednesday against Young Boys, no question. But I would start Idah on Saturday, because Kyogo's away record for Celtic hasn't been that great, has it? I mean, Kyogo's had spells where he's not been great either. Does that make him a bad player? No, because he pops up with 2 brilliant goals away from home on Saturday, and is a massive part in why we win that game because of his goals. So Idah has an opportunity on Saturday, another opportunity on Saturday to score a goal. I would love him to score the goal on Saturday that wins us that game, just because he's a young guy. I mean, you forget he's a young guy who hasn't really had a lot of experience in football. Yes, he's an international player now and all the rest of it, but a young guy that has got the pressure of a full giant support on his shoulders. He's never experienced that before. He's never carried that before. But I mean, he does away goals for Celtic over the course of his loan spell and since he signed. Away at Motherwell, away at Hibs, away at Ibrox. You know, he's got those goals at those points when Kyogo didn't. So Kyogo got them on Saturday, but you always know if you've seen a player do something. If you see Arne Engels have a game like he did against Leipzig, then you know that he's got that in him for another game. You know he's got that in him for Wednesday night, for example. And we obviously will need a big performance from everyone on Wednesday night, regardless of the opposition. It wouldn't matter if we were playing Juventus or Young Boys Bern. The 3 points are the same in that game, whether or not the opposition. So when you've seen somebody do it once, you know that they can do it again. And if I've seen someone do something once for Celtic, then it will definitely remove any doubt that I have and remove a good bit of criticism I have. For example, Yang. I haven't seen Yang do it for Celtic. I'm not counting a 3 or 4 yard header against Dundee as him doing it. You know, that's not it. I've not seen Yang grab a game and go, oh, that was that game when Yang was like 9, 10 out of 10. Remember that time? I can't look back to that game. So therefore, there's always going to be a big question mark over him for me. But with Idah, I know that Idah's done the business for us. And I think it's just a bit of patience. He's not been absolutely terrible. I mean, yes, that was a bad miss on Tuesday. And with a bit more conviction, you don't know what was going through his mind at that point. Was he counting on the keeper doing something different? Was he worried about fouling him? Like, there was all these sorts of things that, in that split second of hesitation, if you don't do the right thing, then there's only one right thing, and there's probably 5 wrong things. So he did one of those wrong things at that point and just didn't commit to it. But are you really going to hang a guy out to dry for that? I don't think that's fair. No,
I think you've also got to look at some of the performances this season. We do look back on last campaign. There were so many of them. You mentioned the Ibrox goal would have been a winner.
It's just forgotten about because of the equaliser at the end, isn't it?
Yeah. And again, that's the moment that I can see Yang, like a rabbit in the headlights, stopping the cross. The basic part of any footballer, regardless of where you play in the park, you've got to defend that. You've got to make sure the cross doesn't come in, and he's nowhere. His positioning is terrible. We bottled it. Are we allowed to say that? Are we allowed to say people bottle it? I think Brendan Rodgers probably agreed with that, because he was barely seen for the rest of the season. That would have been a winner at Ibrox. It was obviously a 3 each game. He scores the winner, of course, in the Scottish Cup final as well. So yeah, you're right. For me, he's still got credit in the bank, JP. You can't write him off when he's shown what he can do. Move into this season, Atalanta away.
They said he was terrible in that game, which I don't really. That's the time when you would like to take one of those people who I remember seeing a comment saying he was turgid in that game against Atalanta, and that's the type of game where you'd like to sit down with someone like Alan Morrison and just say, right, there's the floor, take it away, tell us tactically, throw the numbers at us. What did he do in that game to materially impact that draw? Because he definitely did something
massive.
Everybody on that park did something in that game to get that draw, which still stands out as probably only just second to the Leipzig game in terms of performance of the season. Because no one gave us a hope in hell that night. Folk were saying 4, 5-0. And
another Dortmund. That's what people were saying going into that.
As far as I know, Atalanta haven't fallen off a cliff, and are still performing really, really well. And I don't know, at one point they were the highest scorers in Italy in Serie A. So I mean that's again quite easily brushed over. I mean, how good would it have been if he'd have got a winner in Italy that night? I mean, that would have been unbelievable.
That game, either anyone who says he was turgid or any other descriptive term similar to that, JP, you're not watching the game the same way I'm watching it, because I thought in order for us to get a 0-0 out there, you needed your striker, right, to be absolutely tireless in their endeavours. But also, it's a thankless task because we're not going to be creating many chances for him. It's not like there's a moment where he gets the opportunity to score and he misses. He was Celtic's press that night. The ball was going up. He was the out ball. His defensive work was tremendous. Again, I would like to see the stats. But also on that point, two other players who I thought played out their skin that night were Liam Scales and Austin Trusty. Carter Vickers wasn't playing.
That was widely accepted by most of the comments I saw.
Yeah.
Or people I spoke to about those two players. Everyone was like, "Oh, Trusty and Scales were immense last night," and that was a common comment after that game. So yeah, and then
where are they? Where are they now?
Both of those players are terrible in the eyes of a lot of the support. And
yeah.
Trusty's flip flopping from being one of our greatest centre backs to get him out, get Scales back, and then everyone wants to like eviscerate Liam Scales for the first mistake he makes. By the way, the Dortmund result the other night, they got beat 4-2 off a club I've never even heard of, Holstein Kiel. Ever heard of Holstein Kiel?
They sound like a works team for a brewery, don't they?
But well, they do, and it was they got hammered 4-2, and fair enough, 2 of the goals were late on, but they still got well beaten by a club that I have never even heard of. No disrespect to any Holstein Kiel fans watching, if that's your second team in Germany or anything like that, but.
Let us know. Let us know if it is. We'll find a link somehow. But the thing is, it's been a run of form for Dortmund, isn't it? It's not just that one game. They've lost a few. They've drawn a few. Their form's not great right now.
A 10th.
That's wild, eh?
A 10th.
That team beat us 7-1. That's even worse. No, but the two centre halves. I wanted to move on from the Ida thing. Credit in the bank for me. Arnie Engels. I think people are overreacting to what he apparently hasn't done for the team, because when you look at what he has done, and I've not even broken down what he's done in the league games where most of the penalties have come, but scoring and assisting in the Champions League, that assist in the League Cup, you can't forget that. Arnie Engels made an impact when he came on in the League Cup against Rangers, a game that looked as though it was running away from us. Arnie Engels came in and there was a change when he was introduced into that game. And it's similar with Scales and Trusty for me, right? Because I think it's not really changed during the season. It's been CCV plus A another, right? Whoever's playing the best will play alongside them, and then you can rotate them, and that's a decent enough situation to be in. But then Scales is on a short leash, isn't he? I mean, we could probably trail this conversation back to the League Cup final, where Scales has lost his place in the team. Trusty comes in, and most of us, not all, were saying, right, they can build a partnership now, Trusty and Carter Vickers. That was always the game. That was always the plan. You don't bring in a £6 million player to sit on a bench. Well, Celtic don't. And you thought you had your partnership then until half-time in the League Cup final where Trusty gets hooked unceremoniously. Scalesy comes in and makes an impact. And you think, all right, so Scales back in? Scalesy has his poorest game in a Celtic jersey at Ibrox, and he's back out. And then the other night, Trusty was weak, as the proverbial. He was weak the other night. And yes, it's hard to say I'm going to blame this one for the goal or that one for the goal, but he has to take some of the responsibility for Dundee's second and third goals. So I don't think it's healthy though, JP. Every time somebody has a slightly bad game or a bad game, drop them, because then you're not playing with with any kind of fluidity. You're always thinking, right, there's a fear there. If I play a poor game or if I give away a goal, I'm going to get dropped, and that plays into your mentality. So what do you do? Similarly to the centre forward, what do you do with the centre halves right now? Do you stick with the two centre halves who played the other night and let them play through it? And hopefully they do play through it. We've seen them playing well together, Carter Vickers and Trusty. Or do you make that change? Because I think when you start switching, it's almost as if the gaffer's not sure who the best partnership is.
Well, I think it's kind of different because it's a Scottish Cup game. You would normally expect, like, say, this early in the Scottish Cup, I mean, look who Rangers are playing, Fraserburgh. Right? You'd normally expect to pull first, second, third division side at this point. And at that point, you would make changes, just to give people game time or whatever. So if it was me, I would probably, I think in terms of boosting Trusty's confidence, I would probably bring Scales back in to play that game and then bring Trusty on as a sub, one of the subs towards the end, and start Trusty against Young Boys Bern and give him that platform and give him that confidence boost that, like, I'm putting my faith in you for this huge fixture. You're getting the jersey. Don't be weak. Don't be weak in your challenges, So that's probably how I would work it. Maybe Brendan Rodgers will think completely differently. He is, after all, a highly paid football manager, and I'm sitting talking to you on my laptop. But that's probably.
But what you're doing though is absolutely. We're not saying that we could go toe to toe with Brendan Rodgers or any top flight manager, but we can give a fan's perspective on it. And I look at the centre forwards and I look at the centre halves now, and we're going into this period of next couple of weeks. Obviously, some big games in there, JP. We've also got the Aston Villa game, which you were hoping wasn't going to be a must win. And I'm still hoping it's not a must-win. And you're looking at where we're going to strengthen now. All the talk's been on the left-hand side of defence. So obviously, it is. I mean, the return of Kieran Tierney, it's like the prodigal son returns, right? I mean, there he is. He's right there. And he's been on there for a while.
He's been there pretty much since he left. Well, a year after.
I know, it's like every Thursday, a wee homage to KT. And all the chat has been around him. I get it. There's some new names coming into the frame in terms of wingers. But centre-half and centre-forward, I'm looking at those positions and I'm saying, right, where are we in the centre-half position? Because Welsh has left the building on loan to Mechelen. Dane Murray's come in. And I don't mean to sound bad, but he's filling the homegrown slot when we re-register the Champions League team. And hopefully he'll get some game time because he's done so well to fight back from that serious injury and he's performed brilliantly at Queen's Park. How many times, JP, does a young player go to a championship club and then disappear from view and then he's no longer a Celtic player and he ends up in the third division? There are some players that go there and they actually make an impact, and he's done that so much so that he's been brought back to the club. Beyond that, you've got your three players who we've been talking about, CCV, Trusty and Scales. Nobody else. I mean, Novroski's not even in the discussion. He's played 9 minutes of football this season.
He's been linked with Oxford United.
Oxford, wow.
I just saw that the other day. It was a bit left field. But I mean, he needs to go somewhere and play football.
Who was the last player that played with Celtic in Oxford? There's a question.
Do you know the answer?
No. But right. I know that Paul Byrne played for Oxford,
right,
and Celtic. That's the only one that I can think of. There'll be other players. There will be other players. I'll tell you.
Who's an Oxford United fan? And sorry to bring music into this, but Mark Gardner from Ryde.
Ryde.
Yeah.
Oxford.
He's
That
got
makes sense.
there's a wee group of them that go. A guy Mick Brown as well, who's Radiohead's tour manager, and Gaz Coombs, Supergrass tour manager, also front house engineer. He's a massive Oxford United fan because I follow him and I see him posting about going to the games, and he always takes a picture of his breakfast and then his picture of the game. He's quite sort of militant in that way, but he goes to the games with.
So is his pre-match the same every week?
Oh, aye, and I'm pretty sure some of Radiohead might be in there amongst that as well. Not Tom York, but there may be a member or two of Radiohead that are Oxford United fans because I think that's where they're from. So
what about Andy Bell?
Possibly, yeah. Possibly Andy Bell's been in some of those pictures that I've seen. They usually take a picture of them all together because I think they sit together. It'd be actually good. I would maybe say to Mick about going to a game because it's a stadium I've never been to. So maybe I'll go down on a scouting mission to see how Mike Nawrocki's doing if he gets a move. But you want to see the guy play consistently to see if there's anything about him. I mean, he might be a surprise resurrection in terms of gets a run of games at a club. The club keep an eye on him and maybe he comes back, but I highly doubt it because he's in the building right now and he's not getting a sniff. So
when you get to that point, and by the way, I'm not singling him out, but Ridiculous and I are obviously disagreeing about Engels, but in a good, respectful way, and it's fine. But you get to the point where you've got an idea in your head about a particular player. That'll be the same with managers, JP. And I honestly think Rodgers is looking at Nawrocki and thinking that he's not for me. And he thought the same about Lagerbielke. And that's why he's away to the Netherlands. I think he's playing in 20. Is that right? Enschede. And so Nawrocki for me is a player who I don't even think about. I don't even consider, even though he's in a Champions League squad, I don't even consider him when I'm looking at the centre-half situation because I think we need to move him on, probably a loan with a view to buy-in because he needs to prove that he can actually perform. Do we need to strengthen there? That's the big question. Do we need to strengthen in that area this January? Do we need to bring in another striker? We've been once again linked to Fitzgarden.
Fitzgarden, yeah.
So it's like he gets mentioned every transfer window now.
For about he's becoming like Darren Huckerby, isn't
he? Ray Stephen was the 1980s version. We were always signing Ray Stephen from Mets. Never happened.
Or Robbie Keane. Robbie Keane was always linked with us, and then we eventually got him.
Yep.
Unfortunately, it was in an ill-fated season. Although I loved watching Robbie Keane play for Celtic because it was just amazing to see him in the hoops after being at so many amazing clubs over his career. I mean, his CV's absolutely.
I was looking at it last week when he got that job at Ferencváros.
Yeah,
and I know that people are unhappy with the fact that he went and took Israeli money and he went over there and managed over there. I get it. And then obviously Ferencváros and people are telling me that they're a fascist club. My knowledge of Hungarian football is not great, but that's the chat. Obviously, we've got a Hungarian correspondent in Kevin McCluskey who will fill me in on that. But you're right.
Kevin Kevin kind of likes Ferencváros, does he not?
He's gone to quite a few games, and he's never mentioned to me that they've got that.
There's no way. I mean, I don't know the guy. I met his brother at Hampden because he came up to me and said, "All right," but from the little I heard, or the little I've seen of him online, obviously watched him on this a good few times. I can't see him being aligned. He's not the type of guy that I would say would align himself with a fascist club. Nah. I just don't see it. But anyway,
no, you're right. Not even Undercover, like the old ID film for the 1980s, which
Cadwell.
That was a classic, wasn't it?
Cadwell Army.
Cadwell. I've lost my train of thought, obviously, but Robbie Keane, that's where it is. I'm back, right? So Robbie Keane, the interesting thing that I'm always looking for Celtic threads, and I was delighted, like yourself, when he signed for the football club, because he was one of the guys. He was brilliant. He was unbelievable for Ireland, right? Mm-hmm. Interestingly enough, JP, right? If you look at his career, so he makes his senior debut for Wolves under Mark McGee, former Celt, who sells him to Coventry, who are managed by Gordon Strachan, future Celt. His international career takes in games under Mick McCarthy, former Celt, Martin O'Neill, Roy Keane, and obviously he eventually signs for Celtic under Tony Mowbray and plays most of his games actually under Neil Lennon. So there's loads of Celtic connections there, as well as obviously him coming to Celtic to play. But the one game that really interests me is a game I spoke to Peter Grant about recently, and it was the Ibrox encounter where basically Bugera was given free rein to kick Keane off the park
I remember that, yeah.
all day long. Peter Grant told us, right, there was, I think, 2 big penalty shouts. It's one of the games, I guess, that I've never ever watched it back other than at the moment. 2 big penalty shouts, and Celtic got an apology on the Monday from the referee, who admitted on the Monday directly that they were both penalties. Peter Grant told us that. Sorry, you're going mute, mate.
That's wild.
I know.
An actual apology.
An apology.
I didn't think that sort of thing existed.
I know. He contacted him and Mogga, and he apologised and admitted that both. Okay. I mean, what good's that to us? Mowbray ends up losing his job, but that happened. I mean, why would Peter Grant make it up?
No,
I was amazed. I was amazed when Peter Grant told me that.
Yeah. Well, there's a lot of things that we could be owed apologies for from that time, or from the 90s. Cadetti's offside goal.
Oh, we could dedicate a series of podcasts to that subject. Yeah. Jungle Lion. Absolutely. Let's be friends. Yes, and you are. You're a very special member of the Acsom community, commenting on a daily basis. Rich Harrison. I wonder what Acsom thinks of the captain's recent performances. Well, JP and I will talk about it. I know he's generally immune from their criticism, but there has been a decline from him this season. Shouldn't be nailed on starter. Discuss. Right, okay. So in terms of goal return, we all know Callum McGregor's, his return's been excellent. On very few occasions has he scored more in a calendar season for Celtic, never mind at this stage. But a lot of people are talking about his ineffectiveness in games, and I can't argue with that the other night. I don't think he played well at all. And during the games, etc., JP, and at halftime, we are getting a lot of comments saying, take him off, drop him, etc. And my point, I don't think he's immune. I don't think anyone is immune from criticism. The minute you pull on that Celtic jersey, you are not immune from criticism. But Callum, dropping him, my point was dropping him would be a bad move. Taking him off, saving his legs, etc. Absolutely, we should be doing that in any case. I think dropping him is a bad move at any point. You drop your captain. It's as if there's wider reaching issues. I think Callum McGregor's leadership, as much as his performance, would be massively missed if you were to drop him.
Yeah, but you've also got to look at the other side of that, and what we were talking about at the start of the show in terms of the mental. Fair enough, Callum McGregor is obviously the captain, has played hundreds of games for Celtic and has led us so well since being given the armband. But there's also, he's not immune from that mental draining, like that the right word, not immune from that mental pressure that the players are under. Just because he's been there for so long and he's part of the fabric and he's one of the most decorated Celtic players of all time doesn't mean to say that he doesn't feel the pressure and doesn't feel that kind of slog that I was talking about, where it's just like game 3 days later, game 3 days later, game, no rest. So I certainly wouldn't be. See, if it was to benefit Celtic over the course of those 2 games, and you were to say you didn't start Callum McGregor on Saturday and you started a different 3 in midfield that didn't include McGregor, but then McGregor's one of those guys that you bring on. Say you bring on McGregor, Maeda, Trusty, Kuhn maybe as well. Maybe you don't start Kuhn on Saturday. Maybe you keep him on the bench as well to bring on ahead of Wednesday. But would it potentially benefit Callum McGregor and Celtic if he was to get that rest on Saturday and then play on Wednesday and start on Wednesday? Still come on Saturday at some point, maybe even like the majority of the second half, depending on how the game's going. But I mean, I don't think it would be ridiculous to not play him on Saturday in terms of the amount of games he's played already in this month. But the only thing is, that means you're maybe having to play Rio Hatate, and I've got no trust in that guy at all at the moment.
You have led us on to it, JP, and we've got to discuss what's happened to Rio Hatate's form, because it's fallen off the side of a cliff. He's a shadow of his former self, or the player we know he can be. Because I've always felt he's been pretty inconsistent. at Celtic. Before we move on to him, what's Callum McGregor's best position in your view? I mean, he's played all over the park. Remember, he's been deployed at left back for Celtic. Where do you reckon, at this age, with all the games that he's got in the tank and the fact that he is obviously advancing in age, etc., where's his best position for you?
Well, it's without a doubt in number 6. Like, he's now picked up that Scott Brown mantle and playing there. I mean, I would be surprised if anybody thought otherwise. It's just our midfield at the moment, having been so strong or seemingly so strong, has suddenly, like Paulo Bernardo the other night, didn't play well. You could tell from his face when he was walking off. He was like, yeah, it looked like he'd just been in a washing machine or something like that. He just didn't look like he'd had a good time at all. So players have bad games, you know that. But I would wonder who starts on Saturday in midfield. If you did change it up, and you didn't play Callum McGregor, do you then play Ingles in his role and then put possibly Bernardo and one other? Am I forgetting anybody else in the central?
Luke McCowan is
of course
you mentioned.
How dare I forget about Luke McCowan, who scored a brilliant header on Tuesday and sort of half celebrated. I didn't have any issue with him not running around going doolally. I saw my friend put on Twitter this morning, reposted the Craig Beattie celebration when he scored against Celtic for Hearts, which is actually one of the most embarrassing things I've ever seen. To celebrate a penalty like that and then jumping onto the trackside and run along with your top off was
right. Can we end this show talking about Craig Beattie? That was not part of the plan. I asked him about this. I asked him about it directly, right? So what happened was, you find yourself, obviously in the world of music, you find yourself in obscure situations with people that ordinarily you wouldn't meet. I'm the same when it comes to football. And I was at this charity game where Acsom sponsored the jerseys of the Celtic side. And the Celtic side were made up of ex-players and sponsors. That's the only reason I got a game. And people who could pay to play. Right, and there was a few kind of like celebs in there as well. I'm trying to think of some of the celebs that played. I say celebs, people who are known for being on the telly and that. So anyway,
Martin Compston must have played.
Well, never managed to get Martin Compston, by the way. Never managed to get him because he is a player, isn't he? Yeah. And Craig Beattie was playing this day, right? And the first thing I would say is we're at that point where some of these guys have been out the game for a while and they've not kept up their regime and their diet, right? The reason I enjoyed playing is we maybe played 3 or 4 games a year, and it was always good to have that in the diary. You know, because once you get to my age, you need sometimes to keep motivation with the old exercise. And the first thing I would say, Craig Beattie was in great shape, brilliant shape, like really fit. And he had a brilliant touch. The ball stuck to him. You thought to yourself, he's been playing to a level recently. You could tell that. I mean, the flip side of that, the worst, no disrespect to the guy, the worst ex-Celtic player I ever played with was Didier Agat. He was murder. I even beat him in a foot race. So it shows you how ex-players regress because they're just no training and practicing and whatever. And I'm sure they could get back to that sweet spot, but Beattie was still playing. Anyway, I spoke to Craig Beattie. And I spoke to him about, you know, a player who came through at Celtic. He was a Rangers fan, right? Everybody knows he was a Rangers fan. He came through at Celtic, played a few games, and we made good money off him when he went to West Brom, over £1 million. And the subject of that Hearts celebration came up. He says, what you need to realise about it, he goes, look, I'm going to get slagged for the rest of my life, and anybody who hates my guts is going to continue to hate my guts. He says, but a wee bit of the context from his perspective was that was one of the mental seasons at Tynecastle where they were being ran by Romanov, and then there was other people at the club picking the football team. And it was just, he said it was an absolute basket case, and they didn't know from 1 month to the next whether or not they were getting paid, right? He said, and that was the relief of knowing that they were going to get a bonus, even just for being in the cup final, never mind winning the cup. And there was a chance of the bonus to win the cup because they hadn't been paid, or some of the guys hadn't been paid for months and all that stuff. So that, I'm trying to be balanced, I'm trying to be fair, That was his reasoning.
Well, had he scored that against, I don't know, Wraith Rovers, in that same penalty, in that same scenario, would he have done the same? I don't know. I think there was definitely a bit of retribution on that.
Get up. And the thing is, as well, I'm not sure he would go doing well on This Is Acsom
No.
as an ex-Celtic player. But I am going to let you know who's coming up tomorrow night. It's a really, really enjoyable part of Acsom is speaking to people from all walks of life about their love of Celtic. And, you know, some of them have gone into the worlds of comedy, sport, they've been players. And this week's guest is a musician. So, you know, it suits our kind of chat, JP, but it's Jinky Gilmour, JJ Gilmour, formerly of the Silencers. So he joined the Silencers back in the 1980s. Cracking band. I was only into them because my dad was given CDs when he used to work abroad by the Glaswegians that he worked with, and the Silencers came home one time. My dad would be away for months, and he came home with a Silencer, and we played it to death. It was Blues for Buddha. Brilliant. That was prior to Jinky joining the band. What a talent, Jinky. But not just the Silencers. There's so much more to his story that we're going to talk about. And he obviously wrote The Glory in a Dream as well.
Yeah, well, I weirdly came across his name last night, actually. I had volunteered to go in and speak to some students from New College Lanarkshire yesterday in Tuts, and I met a bunch of the lecturers, and one of the guys, James, had said to me when we met, he was like, I played here a few times, you know, back in the day. And I said, you know, what was your names? And he was like, the Sleeping Prophets. That was my first band. And then Bolana Devil. We played a David Bowie tribute night. And then he said we played under the names Martin and James. And I said, all right, well, I'm doing this archive. I'll find all the gigs you played. So I went through it last night, spent about an hour last night just going through 1990, well, not 1990, because I knew it would probably be around about late 90s. So I looked from like 99, 2000 onwards, and I found all his gigs. And his first gig at Tuts was as a Sleeping Prophets supporting JJ Gilmour.
Oh, brilliant.
In about 2000 or 2001 or something like that. So
and
he's a Celtic fan as well, so he might be watching. So hi, James, if you are.
Big shout out to James. No, I love all the names of bands that never made it, or the names of bands that went on to become known as something else. They're always obscure. It's great. But yeah, JJ Gilmour, absolutely tremendous story. We talk about his love of Celtic, obviously, penning The Glory in the Dream. We are planning to play the demo of The Glory in the Dream, which, you know, it's a kind of unheard, dusty track from 1987 on the show as well. So that'll be on at 6 o'clock or tomorrow night. Really looking forward to it. Loads more. I mean, JJ Gilmour was the front man of East 17. He replaced Brian Harvey.
Is that right?
Yeah.
I didn't
exactly, JP. Exactly.
I've watched documentaries about them recently. I went down a bit of, because I went to an awards do, and the remnants of East 17 were playing at this awards do, and it was like, I don't know, the guy Terry that was in the background, one of the guys that just stood around making shapes and didn't actually do anything. He
still got his big furry jacket.
He was doing. He fronts what is left of East 17, and one of the guys that did a song with Artful Dodger, he's with them, and then some other guy. It was a little bit.
The two main people are not there, Brian Harvey and Tony
Morton.
Right?
No. It was like a live PA at an awards do that I went to. It was an interesting experience. Also,
you were not impressed. Were you?
Also featuring Xander Nation doing kind of like a kind of take on Bongos Bingo. It was a weird night, and I wasn't drunk enough to appreciate what I was seeing. But I went down a rabbit hole with E17 afterwards just to find a documentary about them when they did a reunion in 2006, and it was quite tragic to see how it played out for them. Like Tony Mortimer had all the money but was really unhappy.
Yeah.
It was like in this giant mock Tudor mansion in Walthamstow. The rest of them some of them are living with their mum and dad. One of them's living with their girlfriend's parents and all the rest of it. And you're just like, what a really sorry tale of people who should have had their moment and then be able to live the rest of their life in relative comfort and you know, not have to worry about cash if it had been done right. And then the reunion was kind of not done right, and you compare their reunion to Take That's reunion, and it's just like night and day. So having seen that, I didn't know that JJ Gilmour then joined. E17. That's
He joined
very
E17.
random, very random left at the lights.
Totally. And what came of that was a working songwriting relationship with Tony Mortimer. They started writing songs together, and some of them have appeared on JJ's albums.
Right.
So we were talking about all of that kind of stuff. It goes from Celtic to E17 to Reggie Cray and everything in between.
Wow.
So tune in tomorrow night. Listen, absolutely loved that chat with your good self, John Paul, and everybody in the comments section getting involved. We've been busy. I think there's a lot of people looking at where we are just now and thinking we need to freshen up a wee bit. So keep the comments coming in, because obviously we'll be back tomorrow at 12:30 as always. And it's always great to hear what you think. If you're watching on the catch-up, let us know in the comments section what you think of all the points. We will be live in 2 weeks today with Big John Hartson once again, and we're at Gracie's in Glasgow. It's always a tremendous night. Ticket link underneath the video. All that's left for me to say, JP Mason, thanks for joining me on A Celtic State of Mind.
Cheers, Paul.